After exploring King Island, we sail free Ascent down to its new home in Dover. We pause in Devonport to fix propeller problems and antifoul the bottom. I hired a car to explore and later to deliver Julia to the airport. Looking down on grassy harbour and the abandoned scheelite, tungsten ore, mine. The mine reopened in 2023. We took a road trip to Cape Wickham, at the northern tip of King Island. The Cape Wickham Lighthouse was built in 1861, after many shipwrecks on the west coast of King Island, including 402 lives lost from the Cataraqui, wrecked in 1845. The lighthouse has metres-thick granite walls and is 48 metres tall. Just near the lighthouse is a golf course with incredible views. Back to Curry to pick up supplies. On the way back, we stopped at the famous King Island Dairy to buy some cheese. A tasting plate of the various cheeses. Then on to Curry, the small capital town of King Island, and the other harbour of King Island. An entrance that can be very rugged in strong westerlies. A pleasant late lunch at the harbour. Then it was back to Grassy and dinner at the best, and only, restaurant there, with a view to the harbour. An interesting alternative power machine. A wind turbine driven by air pushed up by waves travelling through the catamaran. A two-hull structure supporting the turbine. We went ashore to watch the penguins coming home. Then it was time for Julia to head back to Ireland. And Sue flew in to sail with me to Devonport. and to experience the penguin homecomings. The plan was to do an overnight sail down to Devonport. Light winds and motoring as we left King Island. A bit later, a nice sailing breeze into the evening. But by midnight, the favourable wind had increased to over 30 knots, 60+ kilometres per hour. Under just a third of one headsail, we were still doing a hard-to-control 6 knots. So I decided to head for Stanley. At about 2 a.m, we motored into the small Stanley harbour and tied up against a local crayfishing boat. Next day, we explored Stanley, including the cottage where Joe Lyons lived as a child, the 26th Premier of Tasmania and the 10th Prime Minister of Australia. A repurposed railway station. The lure of going to the top of the Nut was too great. We took the easy way up. Then back to the harbour to prepare for next day's sail. An early morning start on the 8th of February 2021 to get to Devonport in daylight, leaving the Nut behind, and into the Mersey River, where Port Control requested that we stop a while outside the channel to allow the car ferry to steam in. Then down the river to tie up at the Mersey Yacht Club. Sue had to return to Dover, and I wanted to slip the boat. The club had an interesting slipway, where cradles were rolled out onto this inclined lifting device. My cradle rolled across on the transfer rail line to the lift line, then rolled out onto the lifting rail car, then all rolled down under the water ready for the boat to move in. moving in ready to be tied up and supported. Then the lift begins. Moved in to the transverse rail system. But for the few days I was up, they didn't have to shunt me off to another siding. One reason for slipping was to replace the damaged out-of-balance folding propeller with the old, fixed blade prop I still had on board as a spare. Also in the slipway was another Boro Temptress, but with a pilot house added. All done and ready to relaunch. Cradle moved out on the rails to the inclined transport station and back onto a borrowed, unused mooring. The Spirit Car ferry takes up a lot of the river when turning to leave. The Julie Burgess takes out tourists for a day sail. Here they briefly ran aground, taking a shortcut. On another day, we crossed paths as I took out a new crew member, Gary Potter, for a familiarization sail out of the Mersey River to sea. After a delay due to the death of a friend, Gary joined me for the sail down to Dover. Leaving Devonport early on the 24th of February 2021, we made fast progress in a good northwest breeze for the 135k to Tomahawk, turning about 4:30 p.m, heading southeast to Tomahawk and shelter from the northwest wind. Anchoring in the lee of Tomahawk Point and Island, a very good northwest wind anchorage. Next day, we again left early to use the strong tidal currents through Bank Strait, heading down to Binalong Bay, hoping for a good anchorage in the northwest winds. The tidal flows into and out of the shallow Bay Strait are significant, especially in the narrow Bank Strait between Clark Island and Cape Portland. We were likely to get a 10 km/h tidal flow around Cape Portland and Swan Island, so important in a strong northwest wind to go with the ebbing easterly flowing tide. The Bank Strait between Swan Island and mainland Tasmania. After passing through Bank Strait, we sailed down in an ever-increasing northwest wind to Eddystone Point, where we were down to 1/3 of the Yankee in 30 kt, 60 k winds. A recent aerial view of Eddystone Point and Lighthouse. Rounding Eddystone Point, we were then on a beam reach. This became too much for the small amount of sail, so it was in with the foresail and on with the motor to move down to Binalong. But once there, it was obvious that the mast mooring would be untenable. On an old chart of the area, I had noticed a spot called Cozy Corner, so I thought that deserved a look, so we backtracked. It was well protected from the northwest and surprisingly calm, protected by the headland, island, and reefs to the north. With the anchor down in rocks, we were secure for the night. After a surprisingly comfortable night, we headed off early in calmer weather to the St. Helens entry bar to get the last of the incoming tide. Once over the entrance bar, it was a narrow channel route through the shallows. The chart shows the very narrow channel, especially just after the entrance. into St. Helens. After the narrow entrance, the main harbour opens up. By 9 a.m. we were anchored and ready to do a resupply trip ashore. St. Helens to Wineglass Bay on the Freycinet Peninsula, arriving at 7:30 p.m. after a 110k passage. Into Wineglass Bay. Anchoring near the beach in attractive rocky scenery. An early start from Wineglass, heading for Dunalley in the Blackmans Bay estuary. Through the Charuton Passage between Freycinet and Charuton Island. Passing Lemon Rock, then into the passage. We circumnavigated Ile Des Phoques when we found it was a haven for seals, then continued down the pass between Maria Island and the mainland. Surrounded by cliffs, it was therefore mostly untouched by humans. From Maria down to the bar entrance and Tortuous Channel into Blackmans Bay. The bar and channel wind through shallows and are constantly changing. Mast keeps up-to-date info on the best track on their website. Once through the channel, the depths are okay to Dunalley. We intended to transit the Denison Canal early next morning with the rising tide. So we anchored for the night near the Dunalley township. I alerted the swing bridge controller that we wanted to use the canal in the morning. Looking east to where we entered the canal. Traffic is stopped and the bridge is opened. The bridge controller sent me these photos of us approaching the open bridge. Motoring hard against the incoming tidal current. Once through the canal and nearby shallows, we were into clear water again. From Denison, I was heading for Kettering in the D'Entrecasteaux Chanel. We passed between Black Jack Rocks and Betsy Island. An old Examiner newspaper photo of a boat that misjudged it. Past the Iron Pot Lighthouse and down the channel to the Oyster Cove Marina. Sue met us with the car, and we left the boat for a few days, while we organised for Gary to return to Devonport. Finally, on the 6th of March, 2021, we returned to sail the last 40k, down to Free Ascent's new home in Port Esperance, Dover. As we entered Port Esperance, the grins were obvious. And sailing in to our new mooring. Then safely anchored. Perhaps the spot was magical. Still sailing and racing in 2026. And so ended our interrupted odyssey of sailing Free Ascent from Perth to Dover.